Horror is hard to accomplish in your D&D games, especially when your players continue chomping on the game Doritos and lewd jokes keep coming from the bard player character. However, whether you're playing Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft or a one-shot or other adventure, DMs and players alike want to experience the Shadowfell for what it is. A place where emotions go to die, and despair is the most unwelcome and constant player companion. Trigger warning now before we get too deep. To prepare for these adventures in the shadows and the mists, I will be going over what horror looks like in Dungeons & Dragons and how to incorporate it into your adventures, making it the dark gift that your players will lie awake thinking about tonight on the Cleric Corner. Welcome to the Cleric Corner. My name is Riker, and here we talk about all things Dungeons & Dragons, and we tap into our higher powers to create worlds that are more unique and stories that are more impactful. And apparently wear suits for all of you wonderful viewers out there. And even though it's not a formal occasion, I do want to formally thank you for all of the amazing support that I got in the last few videos. A couple weeks ago, I made a all about how you can make the Feywild better video, as well as last week, a how to make dragons better video. And the response was phenomenal. It's amazing just having to put all of my ideas out for you to enjoy and getting incredible feedback. And so as a thank you, both of those PDFs that I mentioned for those videos are through the link to my Discord below, and I'll even include one later this week about the things that I'll talk about today. And if this video adds value to you, consider subscribing. And if you have any more ideas on how to make the Shadowfell just a little bit more scary, please add them to the comments below. I will be going over 6 tips on how to make the Shadowfell as terrible and visceral as possible. And if you stay to the end, I'll add a bonus tip for those who stick around. But now that all the sappy stuff is out of the way, let's get into the spookiness. Our players are venturing through a soggy swamp, surrounded by leafless trees. An extreme silence permeates the air, broken only by the deafening sucking sound of the boots in the mud with their steps. A chilling frog rolls in, brushing against their skin, cold to the touch. It tastes stale and broken. A character hears whispering. Somewhere. No. Nothing. Looking ahead, the swamp suddenly turns into a grassland. Is it grass? It's too gray to be grass. There wasn't a grassland on the map. Now past the trees they look up. Weird. No stars. Now in the middle of the field, seeing only about 50 feet in front of them, they see a boulder. A lone boulder. Seemingly insignificant, the players walk by, walking for another 10 minutes before coming across another boulder. Exactly the same. Do they go in a circle? They press on. 10 minutes. Another boulder. They investigate it. Nothing. It's the same boulder. They walk again, this time brisker. 10 minutes. Boulder. 10 minutes. Boulder. They start to run. 10 minutes. Boulder. Another direction. 10 minutes. Boulder. They turn around. 10 minutes. Boulder. They go separate directions. 10 minutes. Boulder. All at the same place. They stop. The cleric starts praying to their god to know what to do while the ranger desperately tries to find a path. That's when the fighter sees it. A lone figure, traveling through the mists, silhouetted by it. Not recognizing it, he calls out. It doesn't respond. He walks toward it, catching up, putting his hand on its shoulder, and he turns it around to face himself? It's him. Like looking in a gray mirror. But then the color drains from his face as he sees the eyes have been gouged out, its mouth hanging open with a missing tongue, and bloody words scratched into its forehead reading, "Welcome home." Now, as we pull ourselves out of this scenario, I do not claim to be an expert on horror. However, I do know what makes my skin crawl. Horror comes from the unknown, from unanswered questions, and from the perversion of things that they do know. And that's what the Shadowfell is, a perversion of the material plane and a reflection of it. And while the Feywild represents bounty, the Shadowfell represents lack. Hunger, loneliness, guilt are all examples of this lack. Now, the current problem with Dungeons & Dragons is that as you play now, you are the heroes. You defeat the monsters and the bad guys. And if it bleeds, it can die. And if you die, you can just revive yourself. The horror genre tends to be a lot different. In order for a horror setting to be effective, your heroes are not heroes, but victims. There needs to be higher stakes. And this leads me to my first tip: a fate worse than death. We can leave the healing and the reviving in the game, that's fine. But imagine your player looking down at their arm and watching a little grubworm slowly burrow itself into its skin. Imagine a player hearing voices that continue to ring out, "Help me," that no one else can hear, slowly driving him mad. Imagine a player getting cut and instead of blood, it's snow, and he realizes that he's not himself, but a magical copy. Imagine a character getting bit by a zombie, and as the infection spreads, he realizes that he won't be able to revive from being undead. So I say, let them revive. There's more than one way to skin a cat. You can also implement phobias like acrophobia, the fear of heights, agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces, autophobia, the fear of being alone, and claustrophobia, the fear of tight spaces. Imagine you dedicate entire domains of dread to each of these fears. This isn't a domain that is ruled by a Dark Lord Strahd, but maybe as you walk through the mists of the Shadowfell, you find yourself in a box with only the smell of 6 feet of dirt and this box's last occupants. Another tip to keep in mind with D&D horror is this: ignorance is not bliss, which is a good thing. You don't want bliss. In horror in general, when the unknown becomes known, it stops becoming scary. In a horror genre, your goal is not to understand. It's to survive. That's it. You might describe a player feeling a brush against their leg or a breath on the back of their neck, but they look around, finding nothing. The entire time, your players are asking why, and you don't tell them why, even if you know. Even on a larger scale, in most horror books and movie genres, even by the end, the villain is shrouded in mystery. The characters still go on wondering if the whole thing was a bad dream. Are you sure it died when it turned to dust? Are you sure you killed all of the alien eggs? And this then leads to my next tip: unkillable enemies. Again, in the simplest terms, if things have hit points, they can die. And then the players are the hunters and not the hunted. In the movie Aliens, it would be a lot shorter movie and a lot scarier movies if the aliens were very affected by the bullets that they shot. And now, I'm not saying don't have combat. Please, still have combat. But if they fight whatever they're scared of, have it live on in some sort of way. Even if they killed the clown, they still hear the echo of laughter within their heads. Or if you kill the alien queen, it could have been a decoy, or another being takes its place as queen. But in general, if you can, think about it as playing the creature without a stat block. Make it immune to bullets or attacks in some way. And I'm not saying make the situation unwinnable. They can still win, just not by killing it. Make it clear that the only way of winning is escaping, or removing the influence of these creatures in some way. Now focusing in more on the Shadowfell, a twisted reflection of the material plane. It is a collection of misfortune and evil. Before the players could even find evil beings or villains, they are affected by its terror and its visceral depression. So for my next tip, we're going to invoke dread. Starting with magic, any spell that invokes light simply doesn't work. Instead, illusion becomes so tangible you can actually interact with it. Fire spells are also weakened, but necromancy is given extra strength. You can also implement limitations on healing, like your hit dice not recovering after a short rest, or healing spells only create temporary hit points. And again, speaking of fates worse than death, here in the DMG we have a despair table. In the Shadowfell, the more depressed you become, the more time slows for you. By the time that you end your hour-long depressive episode, 5 years have gone by without you. Beings called the Sorrowsworn are born from these episodes. They become a personification of what the player struggles with the most, or their dark past. And as we learn from the lore of the Shadowkai elves, if you let this depression consume you for too long, you simply cease to exist. And now when you go through these shadow adventures, you can have these players roll a saving throw at the beginning of each day, or whenever you feel appropriate. Now, this plane doesn't exactly reflect everything from the material plane, but it actually reflects the worst possible outcome. A culmination of the bad choices made in the material world, and that means both people and places. That town that you saved from the orc invasion up on the material plane, here, they succeeded. And you get to walk around seeing what could have happened. The tax collector that you helped and set out on a religious path, here that same tax collector steals from the poor without guilt. And now for this tip, just because I feel like there is so much roleplay and story potential with these creatures alone, use the Shadowborn, dark monochrome versions of their counterparts on the other plane. And yes, that means the players too. It might actually be fun to have one player be a Shadowborn of another. These could also be your Echo Knights or your Spirit Bards who call upon these dark versions of themselves. If your character dies, your soul might combine with the Shadowborn and your race becomes reborn. Or in a depressive episode, your souls switch places, walking around now knowing that you're in the wrong body. Or these things could not have souls, and they're chasing after you to claim yours. This figure could represent what the players could have become if they never went out adventuring, or a representation of who they fear to become. And with experiencing the Shadowfell and all of these decisions that could have been made, you can also play with these what-if scenarios in Domains of Dread. What if the Illithid were successful in taking over the material plane? What if a devil escaped from the Nine Hells and brought forth the apocalypse? What if robotic Warforged gained sentience and took over the world, killing all living things in the process? This would be an excellent way to use different kinds of horror genres, just in small pockets that are isolated in the Shadowfell mists. Supernatural horror, post-apocalyptic horror, sci-fi horror, gothic, psychological, paranormal, Lovecraftian, serial killers, and more. Just take inspiration from your favorite horror film. Have your players run through a reflection of the world if they had just made one choice different, and I'm sure you DMs know exactly what decision that would be. Now, all of these tips are great to use with horror, but unless delivered in a manner that reflects mood, it falls flat. For those that stuck around, here is the bonus tip for creating a spookier Shadowfell: table immersion. To create the tension and anxiety and terror in your game, you might be able to use these tricks. Creepy music is useful to create the atmosphere that you're trying to portray, and you can use specific music from the genre that you're trying to portray. Music helps induce the right emotions. When you describe your surroundings, longer, slower, and more detailed explanations will help build the tension. Lower your voice an octave and speak quieter. The players will mimic the vibe that the DM is getting out, so make sure that you are the example. Try to describe things in real time as the players are trying to figure things out and the things that they find. What they're thinking in their mind as they're unsure of themselves. You stare at a reflection in your mirror, watching a single black tear run slowly down your face. You reach up to wipe it away and look down to see nothing. What does this mean? You thought you were better. You thought you fixed this. It can't be this. It must be something different. You blink hard, and your reflection is back to normal. If your table struggles with immersion, and it's something that your players want to get better at, have monsters react to the discussions across table, even when the players are out of character. When you're at the table, you are your character. This keeps interruptions minimal so you can keep the suspense going. Turning down the lights also help in crosstalk. It increases immersion and sets a proper mood just as you would in the movie theater. When's the last time that you watched a horror film with the lights on? Now, with horror being one of my favorite TTRPG genres, I hope I helped you add a little bit more spook into your Shadowfell games, and you found a little inspiration for this Halloween. And again, if you think that this video added value, click the subscribe button below. And next week, stay in the loop as I will be making a video about the Unearthed Arcana, Travelers of the Multiverse, and how to reflavor these new subraces to give even more options and possibilities to your game. In the meantime, go out there and spread the good word of D&D and make the world a better place, both on and off your tables. Happy Halloween!